the risk to sustained high quality milk production, as in high solids milk production, the risk to that is only starting now, actually. And the risk is pasture quality through May and June. So in situations where the swards weren't grazed tightly, maybe weren't grazed at all, maybe that farm cover wasn't corrected through April and into now, and we're carrying too much grass on farms and we're not probably getting on top of pasture quality, the risk will be to milk production is actually a carryover effect of poor graze outs in the spring, getting that effect in May and June and July.
Hello, I'm James Dunne and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With the difficult conditions at farm level throughout the spring of 2024, some may feel it's often as well forgotten about. But there's benefit in taking a look back as to what worked well and what could be improved on at individual farm level. I'm joined by Teagasc Head of Dairy Knowledge Transfer, Dr. Joe Patton, who assesses the impact of a challenging spring for dairy farmers and offers some advice as we look forward to the coming months. So Joe, thanks a million for joining us. I suppose maybe to start with, what's the mood like out there after what has been as we've said already, a pretty challenging spring?
That's a good question. The mood wouldn't be brilliant. I have to say, from a dairy farmer's perspective, that's coming after, this wasn't just a spring effect. I suppose it has been going on for 12 or 18 months at this stage, between regulations and change in milk price and cost pressures, and then maybe the tin hat was put on it this spring with a very challenging set of weather conditions, for sure. So look, it's always the case, isn't it, that the mood is poor when it's raining, but it can change very quickly with good weather. So thankfully, maybe we got a change in weather just in time to save a few people from some very difficult situations. But look, it's probably a bit more optimistic, I would say, but there's certainly people are bearing the scars, let's say, of what has been a very, very tough spring.
And as you say, it's that kind of combination of effects. A lot of things, not only, as you say, it's very easy to say it's just a spring, but there's a lot of things over the last maybe 12 to 18 months.
Oh, yeah.
I suppose, maybe to take a wee look back throughout the spring, and one of the messages that kind of stuck clear with me was making sure the cow was well fed. And can you maybe just comment on that with regards cow intakes, performance? Where are they at on farms, or where were they at throughout that kind of March, April period?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose, look, it was the area where there was a fair bit of comment and a fair bit of there was maybe a bit of disagreement around where our message was on that, James. But remember what we were saying, and we will always say the same, whether the cow is indoors or outdoors. The first thing to do is meet the requirements of the animal. Okay, from an energy perspective, from protein, minerals, from fiber. We've always said that, and I suppose where our message was, and we don't want to spend too long, going back over old ground on this, but the message clearly was, and it has to be remembered maybe for next year when we're maybe back in the same situation, meet the energy and protein requirements of the herd. So, look at. The message around grazing sometimes can be confused a little bit. It's almost as if, I know some people might perceive that as, we're grazing because we've no alternative, I suppose, but that's not what we've been saying. Certainly the reason, and I think this is a very important point, the reason that we wanted to get pushed to at least get cows out to grass by day was actually a nutritional consideration. Okay, it was, can we improve the quality of the diet by putting 6 or 7 kilos of dry matter of grass into cows instead of 6 or 7 kilos of average to poor quality silage? Because let's face it, the quality of silage on farms on average is not where it needs to be, but that's maybe for a separate part of our discussion. So that was the message. That was the reason we wanted to say, that will improve the quality of the diet. And what we did see was, herds that managed to do that, they got from sort of the low teens, 310, 312 protein, maybe up to 330 over that spring period, not into the 340s, 350s where they'd have liked to be, but production and solids was better if grass was going in by day. There's no question about that. And particularly if silage quality or even space in sheds, etc., was poor. So that was our message. There's no
What?
There's no way to supplement your way past that. You know
Mm.
what I'm trying to say? And if we had that was the issue this year. There was plenty of grass on the farms. The issue, James, maybe, and you've seen it a lot in your neck of the woods as well. Obviously people are going to say then, well, sure, that's all right in saying it. That's numbers on a page, but we still have to put the cows out and they're going to tramp the place, I suppose. Wasn't that was the
I was
limitation
going
with
to
ground
say that
conditions?
was it lost a little bit in. I seen it maybe was challenged. Oh, here we go again. Get the cows out to grass type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
There was lots of comments on social media and so on and so forth. But was that lost a little bit on people, or was it just on certain people in terms of
Ah,
that?
no, look, I get it. I get there were there's legitimate exasperation possibly in what we've been talking about. But as we know, like we wouldn't want to be trying to run the farm based on what's said on social media, James, to be honest. We come back and say, look at, or in any media, possibly. Uh, so I think what we really need to be saying is, irrespective of what the opinion is and whatever else, we do know, and it's well worked out between ourselves and other institutions and we know what the energy requirements are. We know what the protein requirements are. We know what the fiber requirements are. So the challenge for every farmer this year was, how do you best meet that? Right
Mm.
now, obviously, ground conditions, and I had fellas screaming at me, and I was, not me, but in particular, but I suppose all our advisors and even some of the farmers that were putting cows out for a few hours per day. Geez, this is crazy stuff. But at the same time, think about where those farms are at now, right?
Mm.
The quality of pasture is probably better on those farms today. Also, and it's a very interesting one, I think it's one big reminder of one big lesson we take from the spring. Those couple of paddocks that we said will never grow grass again, they're back grazed for the second time now, and they're clean, and the sward is coming back the finest on them. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really important one. And it's very hard to say that without visually assessing it. And I know we don't want to be doing serious damage and certainly not doing damage twice. But there is that idea that we can mark paddocks without poaching them. And I've been amazed actually looking, and I know there were certain um, paddocks we looked at in different parts of the country that you'd say, yeah, that's getting to the borderline here. And you look at them today and you say, they're back with 1200 cover on them. They're ready for grazing again. There's high quality pasture on them. In a way, if you think about it, it's actually, the sward is less damaged on those paddocks than the paddocks that haven't been grazed yet, that are dead to the butt and will need a mower to mow them to get swords kick-started again. So the bigger damage actually, James, on a lot of farms strictly from a feed quality and a feed supply point of view, there was actually more damage done by not being able to get out than being able to get out. Strange to say.
Just on that, in terms of is there always has to be a question around we want to limit damage, but as you say, making that decision on the first paddock is often where it falls down. Um, where there's harm being done on a number of paddocks, obviously you have to make a decision, and that decision has had to be made, Joe, on some farms in terms of to stop and to come off for a period of time and to go at it again.
100%, 100%. Like we're not living in some sort of living in some sort of theoretical universe where we can just move cows around on a page, James. I think that's important to say. But at the same time, you'll never learn if you're standing in the yard or standing in the shed wondering. I double down on the idea that you know what, the farms that got out there and pushed on from a sword perspective and from an animal performance perspective, it was the right thing to do. If the sword quality is better and animal performance, like there was a big discussion around peak and will we get cows to peak and all this kind of stuff back in March. Is the cow better able to get to peak with 6 or 7 kilos a day of high quality pasture in her diet, or if she's stuck in the shed eating 68, 70 DMD silage? I take the point, the silage needs to be better than that, but the reality is on most farms it wasn't. So we were actually doing cows a favour and swords a favour by moving them out. And just maybe one final point on this, James, because I looked at this across the country. I would say that it's possible that this was not it wasn't a heavy land issue this year, really. Obviously, farms on heavy ground have faced these type of challenges every year. And like we have the heavy soils program, and there's lots of research done to try and help those farms and back them up. But what I saw this year was lots of farms on very dry ground ran into very poor conditions. And in some cases, maybe the contingency wasn't there from an animal accommodation point of view, from a storage point of view, certainly from a silage supply point of view, in some cases. And those farms suffered because the contingency wasn't in place. And just one quick point on that, and we hopefully move on. But I was just looking actually on one farm that I was looking at down in the southeast. A very interesting thing, and just maybe coincidental. I was just looking at how much pasture they had grazed, or how much pasture had they grazed, let's say, to date on the farm relative to a normal year, let's say, right? And interestingly, when you look at how much less grass was eaten this year than other years, it was somewhere in the region of 400 kilos of dry matter. Point four is 400 kilos of dry matter, which, surprise, surprise, is the equivalent of what's in two bales, isn't it? Roughly. And our message for 10 years has been have a reserve of at least 400 kilos of dry matter for a poor weather situation. It was amazing how this year, this spring, let's say, is what the reserve looks like.
One other one before we maybe move on from the spring. I've seen some commentators out there in terms of, and I just want to comment from you in this, in terms of, do we need to change our systems and early grazing and so on and so forth? Have you just maybe a message or a comment for our listeners on that? Because that has been touted out there.
Yeah, but sure, that's fair enough. Like anybody's free to choose whatever system they want, James. That's and I often wonder about the term system anyway. What does it even mean? In my view, we don't have too many advantages in this country for producing milk. We can grow grass and we get paid on solids, and that's the constraints of the system, isn't it? So you do whatever's best within that constraint. I think there was a bit of an overreaction in some cases around this whole notion of system, but I would say there was a lot of legitimate concern, a lot of legitimate commentary around the contingency around what we need to be doing. So, when we've said this, I think in 2018, we learned an awful lot around having to have feed reserves in place. And for the most part, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've had that. And you think about this year, actually, when you think about this year, despite the fact that we were running close to the mark at the end of the situation, the country still had enough feed to feed its herd, right? Which is a bloody good thing. And it's testament to the fact that farmers have, by and large, taken on the messages on contingency. The worry I would have is actually more so for next winter, funny to say, because I do feel that what has happened over the last 4 or 5 years is that while we built up a good reserve in 18 and 19, in 19 and 20, that probably has got eroded a little bit, particularly with high conifer costs and high fertilizer costs. It's a question I would have for any individual farm to look at. Has our feed reserve kind of slowly dwindled over time? So I would say, look at adequate slurry storage, adequate accommodation for cows, feed space to be able to manage them, and a good bank of high quality feed in place. Those are contingencies, but they have to be welded on to the side of what is the profitable system, rather than saying having a reserve of silage equals a change in system. It just doesn't. It doesn't. It's a very legitimate contingency that the farmers have done that, are glad they have done it. Okay, so like what do we mean? Like, I mean, are we saying that if the sun is shining in next February and March, we're going to leave the cows inside because we've decided to change the system? Where's all the talk about changing system when it's going for you? Maybe should we be saying in those situations, some farmers do need to change the system, which is get the bloody cows out.
What's the focus for farmers? You've probably mentioned one of them there in terms of next winter's feed, but
Yeah.
The focus that there isn't a kind of a carryover effect. There's probably short-term focuses and then there's slightly longer-term ones. So
Yeah.
What do farmers need to focus on over the coming months?
Okay, look, we don't want to be lecturing to people. I mean, there's people with lots of experience out there and they know the stuff, they know the story, right? So we have to be just careful about that, but at the same time, take stock of where we're at, right? What were the things? And we're not telling anyone anything they don't know here already, but what were the real pressure points this spring for people, right? Was it feed? If it was feed, you better sort out feed. Was it calf space or calf health? Are there issues that need to be sorted on calf health? Now is the time make the decisions on those things. And look, particularly if you're in a good group or if there's, it's hard when you're on your own, I would say, to do that. But like get a second opinion, even if you're not in a group, a trusted neighbor, a trusted friend, family member, whatever, work through it. Write down what were the things that really made this spring bad and think about contingency. That's for next season. And obviously feed would be one of them. But one of the big ones I would say is that I mentioned it earlier on. We talked about peak production and the effect on peak, and lots of focus was put on peak in March. Do we need to increase our concentrate intake to make sure that we get peak production? The risk to peak, I would say, James, or the risk not to peak production, but the risk to sustained high quality milk production, as in high solids milk production, the risk to that is only starting now, actually. And the risk is pasture quality through May and June, right? So in situations where, swords weren't grazed tightly, maybe weren't grazed at all, maybe that farm cover wasn't corrected through April and into now, and we're carrying too much grass on farms and we're not probably getting on top of pasture quality. The risk will be to milk production is actually a carryover effect of poor graze outs in the spring, getting that effect in May and June and July. So, I think we have to put it on record. We will hear it. It'll happen where we'll hear, oh, the cows never peaked and they didn't milk well. That's why they didn't milk well. But I would say the bigger risk is pasture quality being quite poor in the early summer. And then maybe people overdoing, they're closing up too much area, for example, for to try and to make up the silage reserves, running themselves into problems with pasture quality in May and June. That's where the milk is going to get lost this year. There
Is
hasn't
there an
been there hasn't been
argument?
that much milk lost up to this point. Like I know there was a lot in the media about, milk is down 15% and down 20% and all this kind of stuff. But like when you look at it, how much milk is actually produced in Ireland in January and February, it's less than 5% of the annual total. So you can drop 20% to 5% is only 1% for the year. The losses in milk will happen in May, June, and July due to pasture quality. And I think if there's one thing we could get people to think about is correct the quality as soon as you can and leave yourself scope in your stocking rate to allow yourself to do that.
I
You
was
know,
just going to come to that point actually. Is there an argument even to maybe if you do normally close up to 3.7 or 3.8 or whatever it is there an argument actually maybe it's 4 for some farms? Should that be relaxed a little bit this year, given the fact there probably is more tidying up to be done on farms, Joe?
yeah, well, I would say look, tidy it up first, and then you could look about closing if you wanted to. Don't be trying to fire it into the first cut. Like, this thing closing up to 4.8, 4.9, and maybe pasture quality being in trouble to begin with and then nowhere to go. Relax it a little bit. Take the surplus bales as they're coming, or take the surplus paddocks as they're coming, I should say, and allow the grass quality to be repaired. Driving high stocking rate to try and drive graze outs. If that forces you into high covers and stuff you shouldn't be grazing, it won't fix grass quality. So
And
maybe having a bit of flexibility in the system to take out some trashy paddocks and sort them out is probably more important.
where
And
is
look, yeah, another
where
thing
is
on,
that at,
yeah.
Joe? Where's that
Hmm?
at for the platform that's growing 13 ton? Like where is that mid-season stocking rate?
Well, mid-season stocking rate it's not going to be 5, is it? It's going to be higher than 3, and it's not going to be 5, but it's
It's
going to be
probably
high.
not going to be 4 either.
It's not going to be 4 either. It's probably in the 3.5, 3.6 mark, which is still a high stocking rate it's still a relatively high stocking rate. Okay. Now it's an interesting one, James, and well, maybe we've done a bad job on this. I don't know, but like you look at the figures coming through pasture base, right? And we had Kate McCarthy did a bit of work on this over the last few months, looking at the figures in pasture base. It seems anyway that people just put 15 kilos of grass into pasture base and never adjust it, right? Now, 15 kilos of grass at 4 per hectare is 4 by 15, would say 60. And people are saying, I'm going to set my demand at 60. But 15 kilos of grass is not enough for the modern dairy cow, right? They'll eat more than that. They'll probably eat closer to 17 plus supplement on top of that in most cases, right? So, like the difference, that sounds all academic, but the difference is, if your cows are actually eating 17, that basically means that, 4
You're
cows per
probably
hectare is
allowing
pushing 70 of a growth rate. And a lot of cases we're not getting that. So then we're running into either the cows getting underfed, or indeed having to go in with a lot more supplements. So in that situation, we end up on the farm with paddocks closed for silage and then having to feed 4 and 5 kilos of concentrate mid-season, not for a production response, but for a grass shortage response, which is an expensive way of sorting out, it's an expensive thing.
So
So,
what you're saying is 60, 65 and a grass allowance of 17 and a half or 18 kilos.
well, if your cows can eat more grass, why wouldn't you give it to them? Obviously, the residual has to be managed in that situation. We're not talking about offering too much grass, like 23, 24 kilos of grass, and cows leaving residuals behind them that will affect quality in the next round. We're still talking about grazing out to sort of 150 residual, or sort of, 4 to 4.5 centimeters, I suppose, in mid-season. Just some work that was done in Moore Park years ago in this, and it's amazing all the work that's done in this stuff that we tend to gloss over time. But very interesting work done back maybe 10 years ago, where they looked at offering higher allowances of grass, um, and to see the effect that it would have on performance of the animals, right? Of the cows, unsupplemented cows, right? When they offered additional allowance of moderate to poor quality grass, there was no performance benefit. When they offered additional allowance of high quality pasture, they got a good response in milk production. Okay? So what I'm saying to you is, there is no point in saying I'm going to be grazing covers of 1,700 or something like that, and I'm going to offer the cows more of that in order for them to eat more. If you're going to go after an increased allowance of grass, it has to be of high quality. Otherwise, you'll get no effect. All you'll get is a higher residual. Okay? So just be careful on that one. It's not to say that, extra grass in all circumstances will result in a performance benefit. It will only result in a performance benefit if the grass is at the tree leaf stage. Okay? So that's an important one. So just in case we think everyone should offer 17 kilos and we're all going to magically get more milk, that won't happen if the quality is poor. And I just think that there's a sort of a narrative out there from, that, if I'm heavier stocked, I should graze heavier covers, or if I'm lighter stocked, I should graze lighter covers. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the wedge is designed to do. The wedge is designed to make you go into the tree leaf stage all the time. So I'd walk away from the idea of saying, oh, well, if I'm heavier stocked, I should have heavier covers. That's just a misunderstanding of how the thing works. So if we're going to offer more grass, it better be good quality. Otherwise, we're going to run into trouble with residuals, and over time, we get no benefit in production.
One other thing that is coming up, and I'm conscious of time, but silage reserves are low. They're at probably an all-time low on a fair proportion of farms. We want to put enough feed back in the yard for next winter, we've already said. We also have the issue of maybe replenishing a reserve that was put there over a number of years, Joe.
Yeah.
We'll come to putting the reserve maybe back in place, but this idea of delaying cutting it, we're in May now, obviously. Advice to farmers around that.
First thing I would say is that delaying your first cut, if you're talking about on a whole farm basis, delaying your first cut to bulk up the first cut is not likely to increase the total amount. It won't increase the total amount of silage made for the year, because all you're doing is taking it out of the second cut, right? And so we will not solve a feed shortage. Let's say we were short 10, 15% silage last year. We're not going to solve that problem by delaying the first cut this year. The only way to solve that problem is to cut more area, right? Is to cut additional area. And if you haven't got, that's the problem. If we don't have that area in the system, we have to get that area. We have to get that feed reserve from somewhere. Okay. So, adjusting, especially in a two-cut system, adjusting your, bulking it for a week or 10 days, you'll add maybe a ton of dry matter to less than a ton of dry matter to the cut, but you'll take a ton of dry matter or more out of the second cut. So its annual production is not going to move, and you're going to be short on second cut. And we've said this consistently. In years where there's been fodder shortages, the farms with the latest cutting date on the first cut are more likely to run out of silage. Right? The farms that cut it in May don't tend to run out of silage. The ones that cut in June are more likely to run out of silage, because generally what causes a problem with feed availability is how much second cut you get made. right? So just
Mhm.
look, very difficult to say. You said fodder stocks are at an all-time low on farms. We can't really say that because we don't know.
Mhm.
But I think each individual at this point in the year we don't know. But we know from our fodder surveys that there was 10 or 15% of farms likely to be short. That's probably the way it played out. But until we get more data in and more measurements in from farms, we can't really say that it's an all-time low. But the point is, the
Yeah.
individual has to make their decision. No point in saying to anybody, "Oh, well, the country is on average okay for silage." But sure, what difference does that make if you're 20% short yourself? Look at your own situation and fix the problem sooner rather than later. That is such a simple message. It's such a dull message, but unfortunately, it seems a lot of the time we seem to want to wait and see what happens. And waiting to see is probably it's a tricky one this
So
year because I
the
don't think the reserves will be there to be bought, you know?
yeah, the message really is get a budget done and see where you're at an
Absolutely.
individual level.
Yeah.
In terms of that reserve, and um, the reality is those reserves, Joe, were built up over a number of years in a lot of cases. Some farms will have to look maybe outside their own land block to secure additional feed to put that reserve back in place. Do we make the quality at home and do we look to buy the dry cow feed or a proportion of it or
But I would say that, you know, where is there if you go onto any of the trading platforms at the moment to buy silage, is there 74, 75 DMD silage available to buy? No. Is there 62 DMD silage in bales to buy? Yes. So the chances are you'll buy filler. And if you can buy filler, make quality yourself, right? And possibly filler will be bought cheaper than quality. That's the simple, unless you have control on the cutting of the field, James, how are you ever going to get quality? You
yeah,
know, it just won't happen. So unless it's a crop like maize, for example, which obviously has its quality parameters, but the amount of maize available in total, like the amount of maize available in total additional than there was last year mightn't be that large. Will it be a couple of thousand, few thousand hectares extra? If it was, it'd be great. But can we say that at this stage? No, we can't. That those decisions are being made and will be made. All that'll all be wrapped up very, very soon. So, like,
in mm,
so how much extra? Like the idea, like you hear this all the time. People say, "Oh well, I'll buy 15 acres of maize and that'll solve the problem." But which 15 acres? Where is it? Like, everyone else needs it too. So we just need to be careful on that. Don't count it unless you have control of it. So I would say in general, buy the dry cow feed and try and make some quality under your own control, I would say. Um Now don't ask me about how much should we be paying for standing crop silage because like I mean that's a decision for there's a purchaser and there's a vendor and there's a purchaser in every trade and that's up to them. But I would say speak to your advisor, do your sums on it between cutting costs, fertilizer costs, account for 15 or 20% losses as well. That's a big one. It's you lose 20% with the best will in the world, you lose 15 to 20% of the crop from standing in the field to feeding out. So remember to account for that when you're valuing the standing crop. And after that, it's really it's a job for you and an advisor to work out, I would say, rather than us we can't set a figure on that. But yeah,
yeah.
that's a fair.
It's pretty clear, I suppose. Act early, know where you're at, and act early is the advice. Very good, Joe. That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, folks. Thanks to Joe Patton for joining me on this week's show. Very clear, concise messages for the coming months. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.